So the negative claims that the U.S. should keep the embargo because Cuba has not met its demands with changing to a more democratic government, and that the U.S. would look weak if they chose to lift the embargo. However, according to Dr. Gomez in the Sociological Perspective on Human Rights, a magazine that was published in 2003, she states that it is hypocritical to restrict American rights as a means of forcing another country to embrace freedom. It is also hypocritical to demand that Cuba adopt a representative democracy given the long history of U.S. support for dictatorships in countries that favor American interests. And what she's referring to is that how we support other countries like Vietnam, China, and North Korea. And then according to Robert Johnson, an author on the Business Insider magazine, wrote an article in 2011 and stated that if 50 years of sanctions have not toppled the Castro regime, there was no reason to think that the embargo will ever work. And then again for Jose Miguel Vulcano, an author, the Americas director at Human Rights Watch, wrote in Time magazine that to promote human rights, judicial independence, free elections, independent unions, and free expression in Cuba, the U.S. government must understand that a multilateral approach is necessary. Involving key democracies in the region and reaching out to Cuba is much more likely to move the Cuban government toward respecting fundamental rights. And if they think that the U.S. will look weak, according to a UN general vote, United Nations, in 2013, the United Nations has denounced the U.S. embargo against Cuba for 22 straight years. The vote against the embargo was 182 to 2 in 2013, with only Israel supporting the United States. That's a misprint, but yeah, that's to state that other nations don't like the embargo on how the U.S. has an embargo on Cuba as well. So the U.S. shouldn't be afraid to look weak in front of other nations. Also, it should not be afraid to look weak in front of its own country, because on the Council of Foreign Relations, a poll was conducted after the U.S.-Cuba announcement in December 2014, after the announcement Obama made. They found that a majority of Americans supported reestablishing diplomatic ties. A Pew Research poll found 63% of Americans supported resuming diplomatic relations, and 66% would like an end to the trade embargo. A Washington Post news poll found that 74% of their respondents were in favor of an end to the travel ban. And in 2014, a Florida International University poll indicates a majority of Cuban Americans also support normalizing ties and ending the embargo, signaling a generational shift in attitudes toward the island. Also, the U.S. would not look weak because Cuba is no longer a threat to the United States. According to Alain Pierre Hobas, he wrote in the Atlantic Journal, Cuba's relationship with the Soviet Union during the Cold War raised concerns about U.S. national security, but that era is long over. The USSR dissolved in 1991, and American foreign policy has adapted to the change in most aspects apart from the embargo. In place, the negative also stated that the embargo is in place for a reason. However, quoting President Obama from his State of the Union address in 2015, when what you're doing doesn't work for 50 years, it's time to try something new. And then lastly, I'd like to conclude that according to Amy Manis, an author in the National Center for Policy Analysis in 2013, she stated that an influx of U.S. tourists and businesses would expose the sheltered island to our culture and freedoms and weaken the Castro's regime, their control over the information coming into the country. Trading with China led to economic reforms that brought 100 million people above the poverty line and improved access to healthcare and education across the country. So in conclusion, the Cuban embargo was put into place for a reason, but the main reason was caused more than 50 years ago, and current generations right now see a shift in public opinion and seeing that the US should lift the embargo and nothing but benefits with economic-wise and democratic-wise and technological-wise to Cuba. Thank you.